Hello, time to take a deep dive into Henry Purcell's famous anthem, I Was Glad. Buckle in, this is going to be a long one. This rather striking statue is erected close to Westminster Abbey in London. Its title is The Flowering of the English Baroque, and the gentleman whose brain is doing this very vivid flowering is a certain Henry Purcell. Now, read a few biographies of Purcell and before long you'll encounter the claim that he was the finest composer of choral music England's ever produced. I actually don't think this is too much of an exaggeration, but one thing that's worth saying right now is that it's all the more remarkable because Henry Purcell was only ever a young man. He died at the age of 36. In those 36 years, or I guess at least 20 or so of them, he managed to compose music of such variety, such intensity, and such talent that, frankly, it's depressing to think he only had half a life. Because if he was producing this kind of stuff when he was in his 20s and 30s, just imagine what he could have done with another 40 years. There's lots to be said about Purcell, who was, by all accounts, a very interesting character. But let's talk about the music instead. I Was Glad is a 5-part anthem with 2 soprano lines because it was written for Westminster Abbey, where the choir had 2 rows of boy trebles. It was performed at the coronation of James II in 1685, as part of a centuries-old tradition of settings of these words being sung at English coronations, continued in the 20th century, as you probably know, by Hubert Parry's famous setting. Well, famous in Britain anyway. As is obvious from the title, it's a very joyful and celebratory text, though weirdly it's about the city of Jerusalem and nothing to do with England at all. Why we English like to pretend that there's some deep connection between England and Jerusalem, don't ask, it's a long story. The music shows Purcell, if not quite at the height of his powers, because by the end of his life he reached even higher heights, but at least putting in a very strong showing. The opening section is bursting with joy and energy, and it achieves that rare feat of being as much fun to sing as to listen to, especially if you're an alto actually. Then there's a lovely, rich and subtle prayer section in the middle, and then a galloping romp of a Gloria to finish. The good news is that I've never known a choir that's failed to enjoy this piece once they've nailed its tricky corners. But there are indeed a few tricky corners, which makes it important to think about how you want to approach teaching it. The fact that it divides into 3 musically quite contrasting sections provides an obvious script, I think. Having said that, you know your choir and its rate of learning better than I do, but personally I wouldn't split the 3 sections over 3 rehearsals, unless you have lots of other stuff to get through. The main reason for this is that you just don't need to. Working on the intricate opening section might be tiring, but when your singer starts to get weary, the peaceful and rather more straightforward middle section is exactly what they need as a palate cleanser. Maybe save the Gloria for another time. If you are able to split your choir in half for sectional rehearsals, then both the first and last sections are places which might benefit from doing that. These are intricate, not to say fiddly, passages, and you may well need to do note bashing and rhythm bashing, which can be done more efficiently in parallel, with sopranos and altos in one room and the tenors and basses in another, than all in one big room where, with the best will in the world, everyone has to wait for everyone else. Of course, not every choir has the luxury of 2 rehearsal rooms, 2 directors, 2 pianos, and so on. It's certainly not essential, but I just wanted to plant the idea. In any case, the middle section can definitely be rehearsed with a full choir. No need to split into sections here. This is homophonic, and what matters is the chords rather than the individual lines. So, let's take the sections one by one. What do you need to think about with the opening? The dotted rhythms, and indeed the double dotted rhythms, are clearly the defining feature here, the way Purcell represents the gladness of the words. But actually, the mood is set before you hit even the first dotted rhythm by the first 3 notes, 2 crotchets and then the downbeat. Now, you can sing this opening declaration in any one of half a dozen ways, and whichever way you choose will set the scene for what follows. Do you want to swing it 1 in a bar, I was glad, in which case what follows is, was glad when they said unto me, also kind of lilting and legato. Or do you want a snappier, I was glad, which leads to was glad when they said unto me, also martial and bouncy. I don't think there's a right answer. You might want the lilt or the bounce or anything in between. The only comment I'd make is that if your choir is big and a little on the unruly side, the lilting version might work better than the snappy version, which needs a lot more precision. Just a thought. And then those dotted rhythms. Oh golly gosh, those dotted rhythms. What a delight they are. Now, for an authentic Baroque style performance, dotted rhythms should be very dotted, really snappy, a million miles away from a triplety rhythm. And that applies especially to the so-called Scotch snap, this inverted dotted rhythm, which has the effect of making the music sound kind of breathless. And Purcell also throws in a few fake Scotch snaps, as it were, places where the way the words are set to the notes makes you think you've heard it even when you haven't, like this in bar 11, which would be a Scotch snap, except it's displaced by a quarter of a beat. This is a lovely effect which adds an extra spring to your step by making the singers jump on these words a fraction before the audience expects them. It's worth pointing this stuff out in rehearsal, not just because this is fun, but because it also makes singers aware of the level of precision in Purcell's writing. Precision is really a very important feature for Purcell, whether it's rhythmic precision in the fast sections like this, or in the slow section we'll look at shortly, harmonic precision, which gives him note-by-note control over the cadences. In both cases, little details like this, and this, which then comes again in bar 24, are likely to be overlooked, not only by the audience but also by the choir if you're not keeping a close eye on them, and that would be a shame. As another example of how this precision needs to be consciously maintained, look at bar 5. This is a classic situation where everyone in the choir needs to be aware of the exact vertical alignment of the parts, because if they aren't all doing it really accurately, it will just sound like they're getting it wrong. There's another example of rhythmic intricacy around bar 27 with "to testify unto Israel." You can tell your singers that double dots are not scary, they're just single dots with an extra beat in front of them, but they do have to be very accurately rendered here to do the music justice, especially in places like bar 25, which you can tell just from looking is a glorious moment, but one that's rather at risk of sounding like a mess if it's not well practiced. Incidentally, some editions of the score have straight quavers rather than dotted rhythms here, which I personally think is far inferior, though I haven't made any effort to investigate which is more authentic. I mentioned triplets earlier, and triplets are really your enemy here. Singers, modern singers anyway, can very easily slip into a kind of swung triplet feel when they have long strings of dotted rhythms, and that's no good for Purcell. As an example, consider this run of dotted rhythms, which is probably the most fun thing you've asked your altos to do in weeks. Now, there's a world of difference between de he 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 vid, that's the triplet version, and de he 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 vid, that's the dotted version. If you hear the triplets sneaking in, slow things down and help the singers hear the subdivisions. 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, 3, and. You can even safely ask singers to exaggerate the dottedness for two reasons. The first is that what they think of as exaggerating would probably end up just being accurate anyway. And the second is that in Baroque times, these rhythms would probably have been performed more dotted than the notation strictly implies. Speaking of doing more than the notation implies, there are some moments of virtuosity that will probably need some attention. Tenors have the best of it in bars 28 to 30, starting with these 30-second notes, or what we call in Britain demi-semiquavers. It takes a little bit of vocal technique engaging the diaphragm to punch out these notes at a good speed and not make it sound like a messy glissando. Draw attention to this and work on it in isolation in rehearsal. You can even make diaphragm-supported notes the focus of a warm-up. So anyway, let's think about the structure of this section. We start off with "I was glad," and it's obviously going to be a full sound here. And we could quite easily just plough through the entire first part of the piece without missing a beat, so to speak. I've heard some choirs sing it like that as if it was Haydn. And it's kind of fair enough, since we have the middle section still to come, which will give us some real contrast. But if we look a little closer, I think Purcell provides us with a few opportunities for light and shade, even within the opening section. One really clear change is bar 37, for "There is the seat." This stands out to me as an important moment. Look at what Purcell does with the notes, which have been endlessly dancing along until now. The harmony suddenly stands still for 2 whole bars, with a kind of fanfare in C major, even the basses leaping up to join the rest of the voices.
For there is a seat of judgment.
And even more telling, look at what he does with the rhythms. Here's a pair of straight quavers. Here are some more. It's almost jarring after all those dots. So personally, I think you have to do something contrasting with this little passage. You can either make it suddenly legato and a bit more gentle than what came before, for there is the seat, or, as is suggested in this edition here, you can play up the fanfare element and make it a really bold pronouncement, punchy and maybe even slightly detached, for there is the seat. The second opportunity for contrast is bar 47, where you have this sequence of crotchet starting with just sopranos and building up gradually with imitative entries. Again, I think it's up to you to decide what contrast you want to make with what's gone before, but it does have to be contrasting in some way since Purcell is clearly making a change. It's also worth drawing attention to some of the tricky moments in terms of notes. Now, it's not like there are any really awkward intervals or challenging dissonances. It's more that there are some small details that are quite hard to get right. Purcell is forever decorating his music with F naturals and B flats, usually not because he wants to change key, but simply because he thinks it's fun always to be slightly weird. Many of them are so short that you could easily blink and miss them, and many are reversed a moment later, which is also easy to get wrong. As a random example, here are some decorations in bars 8 to 12, and here are some in bars 26 to 29, but they really are everywhere. I strongly recommend rehearsing these passages slowly for note bashing purposes. And finally, the bass line is also quite angular in places. It's nothing extreme, but it may be worth just walking your basses through it if they aren't perfect sight readers. The pitching can be tricky. This tritone in bar 40 stands out in particular. But the vocal tone might also need some attention with all those jumps up and down, such as bars 28 to 30 in the place I mentioned a moment ago, bar 37.
For there is a seat of judgment.
As a rule of thumb, when the basses are leaping an octave or more and the other parts are not, the blend is at risk. Basses need to be careful to keep their tone controlled so they don't stick out by crossing constantly over their break from chest voice to head voice or from rumble to shout when they leap. Then after all that we get a dramatic change of mood and we enter the slow middle section, O Pray for the Peace of Jerusalem. Rhythms like those in bar 59 have up till now meant bounce and energy, but suddenly they mean almost the opposite. It's a kind of declaratory speech rhythm, all homophonic syllable by syllable and all piano. Take it easy with those dotted rhythms. They should be together, of course, but they should also feel natural and organic and kind of weighty, not breathless like the first section. So not Peace of Jerusalem, but Peace of Jerusalem in speech rhythm. Even more so, take your time with the crotchet rests. They are the natural breath between these short sentences. For the peace of Jerusalem, they shall prosper. It's worth pointing out that you, as conductor, will be doing a completely different job here from what you were doing in the first section. There, you were providing a precise lead and communicating energy and bounce, and they were doing all the work between your beats. But here you're leading them syllable by syllable through collective choral sentences. There's no need to worry about the actual beats of the bar. It's far more declamatory than that. There are some words to really enjoy here. Purcell does all the work for you with the word peace, isolating it and emphasizing it every time it comes. But another important word, plenteousness, is a bit more on you. Be very generous with it, plenteous even, each time it comes. In fact, in general here, help the choir with the emphasis. The aim is for the words to be very clearly communicated in a speech-like way, so singers need to understand the important words and direct each phrase towards them. Plenteousness within thy palaces. More leaping bass here, but this time they have more time to think about it and keep sounding nice. I also want to talk about the cadences because these are quite special and they demand a bit of sensitivity from your singers. Purcell does this lovely thing where each cadential approach in turn gets a little bit more intricate than the previous one. And just as it was important in the first section for the intricate rhythms to be very precise, here it's the same but with harmonies. The harmonic intricacy needs to be precise. Why is this so important? Let's zoom in a bit on what Purcell is up to and you'll see what I mean. Here's the first cadence, bars 61 to 62. From a distance it just looks like a straightforward chord 5 to chord 1, so E major with a 7th to A major. But actually there's a bit more going on. It starts with a suspension of the A in the second soprano. Okay, nothing too outlandish there. But there's also an accented passing note a third above in the first soprano, C natural, making this moment a bit crunchier, because you briefly have C in soprano against D in tenor. Then soprano 1 moves down to make space for the more conventional 4-3 suspension in soprano 2, which resolves to a G sharp, but then soprano 1 moves down again to an A, anticipating the resolution. This means that you have a moment here, just before the bar line, where the audience hears a crunch that's actually quite surprising in isolation. Now, this is not massively unorthodox, just kind of cool, but Purcell is just getting started. Bars 70 to 71 are kind of weird because there's so much anticipation that pretty much the whole cadence seems to come early. And then 78 to 80 and 83 to 85. I won't break them all down for you, but look at the crunchy sequence of chords we're treated to. Now, this is not a video about harmonic analysis, and I'm not just geeking out about this stuff for the sake of it. It matters because it is only going to sound good to the audience if it is confident. As you approach these cadences, your tuning has to be really sensitive. The slightest hint of insecurity or wobble among the singers will sound like an error even when it's not. I'm not suggesting it needs to be broken apart and rehearsed line by line necessarily, because none of the lines are actually difficult to pitch in isolation. It's more about slowing down the chords so that everyone can hear and become accustomed to the sound that Purcell is asking for on each beat and half beat, and so that everyone knows how their note fits in. Do this once carefully and it will pay dividends in terms of audience appreciation, not to mention choir appreciation. Then there's the final section, which is another bold contrast. We've had light and bouncy, we've had slow and deliberate, and now we have a final section which starts with this bold repetition of the word glory. Make a lot of the gl here. And I like to put little breaks between each word, ready, steady, go style, because I like the impact this has after all the long phrases the previous section. It does expose the tenor movement here, but that's a price worth paying, I think.
Glory, glory, glory be to the...
Your main decision as a conductor here is to decide how fast you want to take this. I've heard it done, and indeed I've done it myself, either at a steady pace or really quite fast, which transforms it into a kind of breathless gallop. The gallop is a lot of fun for the audience, and it can also be exhilarating for the choir, once they've nailed the notes of course, but it does trample on most of the subtleties and details, and it involves some rather awkward snatching of breath, or more likely not breathing at all and just running right on, in bars 103, 104 and 105. I have to admit reluctantly that steadier is probably better. Here's how it sounds at that tempo. This part of the piece is also the most difficult for the choir to sing accurately. The parts mostly move independently and they're rarely very intuitive. The challenges fall into two groups. First, entries which leap at the singers out of nowhere like these, and second, awkward intervals within phrases like these. Both types of challenge are made trickier by the fact that the music goes by pretty quickly, and sometimes with hardly a moment to think. And this is true even if you take it at a more steady speed. There are places where it seems like Purcell was hearing 6 or 7 parts in his head, but only had 5 voices to play with, so you get double or triple entries like this, sometimes with the parts overlapping to provide the 6th or 7th voice in the fugue. The solution to all these challenges in rehearsal is to slow the music right down and let singers get their brains around what's going on. But whereas with the intervals, it's most useful to let singers run their parts in isolation so they can hear and understand how their line goes. With the entries, what helps most is for singers to hear all the parts together so they understand the context out of which they have to pluck their first note. Sometimes there are helpful cues in another part which pass you the note, such as in bar 95, but sometimes there aren't. And even when there are, sometimes the pace is too quick to really make use of those cues, or another part gets in the way. And in that case, it's more about harmonic memory, internalizing the flow of the music so that when you're familiar with the context, your brain supplies your note from memory without you having to calculate it each time. Once you've worked through all the notes in this section, what's left is to notice a few expressive details. As I said before, it's easy to sing it just as a breathless gallop from start to finish, but in fact there is also space for some musicality. For instance, notice how all the parts are moving at the same rate early on, but by the end there are 3 different rates of movement. The upper voices still on running quavers, the tenors on crotchets, and the basses on those long pedal minims and semibreves. You might want to think about the different weights of those different passages. One option could be light and fluent at first, then increasingly heavy as you get towards the end. But there are other ways to interpret it too. Along the same lines, what are you going to do with dynamics? Just like the speed, one perfectly valid choice is just take the whole thing at forte. After all, you paid your debts to subtlety in the middle section, and this Gloria is your payoff. So you basically do dynamics at the level of each section of the piece. Well, alright, but another option is to mirror the rhythmic density in the dynamics. You could actually start the fugue section at an excitable piano, after the glory, glory part, and then build gradually as the music gets heavier, with the basses leading the charge at the end by thumping it out. As with pretty much everything by Purcell, this piece really rewards hard work and investment. Not all of it is easy by any means, but all of it is worth it once you've nailed it. Enjoy it, and if you get any benefit out of this video, post a comment to boost my ego. Thanks for watching and see you next time.